Great to see lots of you joining our webinar today. This is our weekly Tuesday session where John and Ravi give the update on the government support measures and everything new that they've learned from working with the Acuity clients over the last week. So over to you, John.
Great, thank you, Rosie. So as I was saying, we're going to spend some time this morning just recapping on the schemes that are out there and learning about the things that we've noticed over this week that are new and interesting, that are also important for you as business owners to understand and appreciate. What we won't be doing this week is going into great detail within the schemes that we already know about, so we're not going to be talking a lot about the legibility requirements, etc. for these. We will be talking about some of the new things that have come out, so the bounce back loan scheme that we heard about yesterday. So we'll talk about the detail that we do know about those. But for the other schemes, we're just going to be commenting on our experience over the last week or so and what we think you need to know. Let's put up the slides. So just to take a quick 20,000-foot view to remind ourselves what is out there, what's the support available for the SME business world out there. So right at the top of the list, we have our coronavirus job retention scheme, so the furlough worker scheme. We have the mirror of that for the self-employed scheme, which hasn't been launched yet. With the various different cash grants, so we had the 10K and the 25K cash grants being dispersed by local government, and we've seen a lot of those being, or most of those perhaps being received by our clients now, where they've been eligible for these. We've got the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme. So this is the government where the government are guaranteeing loans being dispersed to businesses via the lenders that we already know. And we've now yesterday learnt about a new scheme that will be in addition to this, which is the bounce back loan schemes. This is a 100% guarantee scheme. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail later on. Various different businesses on the high street have had this business rates tax holiday automatically applied to their business rates tax bill. We've seen two formalised tax deferrals. That was with the VAT payments that were due over the next few months being deferred all the way to 2021. And those individuals paying tax via self-assessment, you've seen your July payment due at the end of July, so your mid-year on-account payment being cancelled and shifted towards January 31st, 2021. And lastly, and we touched on this last week and have learned a little bit more this week, the scheme from the government aimed at equity funded growth startup type businesses, which is the Future Fund and the Innovate UK grant fund, more on the R&D spectrum. So the most important scheme for this week was the coronavirus job retention scheme, or the furlough scheme. So we saw the portal successfully launch on Monday. Rishi reported yesterday that over 500,000 people representing the 4 million workers have applied and successfully applied on the platform. As a business, I think we've probably processed near on 200 claims across our offices, and what is already great to see is that those that we're able to process and submit on the first Monday, we're already hearing that the businesses are receiving that money. So the government said that you would receive your money within 6 working days of successfully submitting your claim, and that seems to be the case in practice, which is great. We've had a lot of questions still around how long will this last for, how long will the scheme go on. The only firm information we know at the moment is the scheme was extended from May to the end of June. We've seen in the media and across various different channels discussions of, is it going to end in June? Is it going to be extended? Clearly, a lot of very effective industries are putting a lot of pressure on the government to extend this. We've had a lot of the airlines speaking up and saying that we're going to need the scheme for much, much longer. Personally, and from what I see out there, I think the most likely outcome is that come the end of June, we'll start seeing a phased reduction in it. So perhaps we'll still see the scheme available for those very vulnerable industries, or those industries such as retail and the high street, which are being told to remain closed. But across the rest of the economy, we might see that scheme pulled away. As I'm sure, as Ravi would reiterate, do not assume in your cash flows that the scheme will last longer than June. So always work on the basis of the worst case scenario. We've also had a number of questions around when can I make my claim? Now, the guidance really boils down to you should be making your claim at and around the time of running your payroll. So if you run your May payroll on the 25th of May, you should be making your claim at and around that time. So when you know what your payroll is going to be for the month, and you've got all the information around who remained furloughed for that period. There is no limit, however, on backdating your claims. So if you're yet to make your claim for March and April, you can still do that, presumably for as long as the portal remains open. And actually, there was a lot of confusion about this in the first 24 hours, where we had a lot of clients thinking you had to make the claim within the first 2 days of the week to get your March and April furlough grant in, which is not the case. Okay, that was HMRC were releasing some information saying that, well, if you make your claim within the first 2 days, you'll receive your money by the end of the week, which was not actually accurate or correct. They stuck by the 6 days after making your claim. It's worth noting that at the moment, the portal only allows you to make one claim per period. So once you've made that claim, you can't currently edit or change that or make further claims for that period. We understand HMRC may change this, but at the moment, once you've chosen those people and furloughed them for that period, you can't then go back and say, hey, I've forgotten this person, or actually we did furlough this person over this period, which we decided we wouldn't, but they nipped in the end. Okay, so you can't change that at the moment. It's also worth noting, HMRC said they would be checking claims. One of the biggest risks to the taxpayer for this scheme is fraud. So fraudulent claims being made, so claims on employees who are not furloughed. HMRC are already making these checks. So our team's already getting calls from HMRC asking us to check, or to at least to represent whether the information that we've got and are submitting as payroll agents is true and correct. Okay, so that will more than likely continue beyond this scheme being open. So make sure you are vigilant in putting together your claim, and that where you are furloughing employees, you're ensuring that they do remain furloughed for the claim period. Just as a note about how we're helping our clients, so if you are a payroll client of ours, so if we are your appointed payroll agent, we can submit the claim on your behalf. Okay, so payroll agents get access to a slightly different version of the portal where we can access all of our clients and put their information in directly. And to do this, we're working on just a small fixed fee basis, and you would have been contacted already as a client if you are a payroll client of ours, describing all this information. We also circulated amongst our payroll clients the tool that we've been using to collect our information and can calculate most of the claims, and we've just given that to you to use. So if you're a payroll client and want to submit your own claims, you can use our tools free of charge. We're just giving them away. Now, beyond our payroll clients, we've began sending out the tools as well. And I think Rosie is including links to these tools in distributions that she'll be making across our client base later on this week. Ravi, it's probably worth pointing to you now is, what are you seeing and what are you discussing with clients in relation to their furlough strategies at the moment?
Sure. So I think, understandably, it's been a busy kind of 7 to 10 days around the job retention scheme applications, HMRC, and making sure that we're providing all the information we can to get those funds in the door. However, what's been quite interesting over the last week is the team and I are actively holding and participating in conversations with the client around, okay, what's next? We've effectively played defense for quite a while to make sure cash was stable, but how do we then start planning for the future? How do we turn this into, how do we go on offense? And it's kind of split depending on what kind of industry you're in. So obviously, there are some industries out there that have been specifically told to close, so retail, leisure. For them, the conversation has been more around, okay, what can we do right now, if anything? Do we go on to e-commerce? What can we do, if anything, now? But also, what steps we need to put in place to make sure when we do come out of this, we do well as a business? And then the companies who are in kind of construction, manufacturing, which we are starting to see go back to work, it's all around our reopening planning. And effectively, that involves 4 key steps. So first and foremost, we've been focused on making sure that the production floor, the factory floor, is safe to work for all of our workers, and adhering to social distancing measures. we're then understanding, okay, we're then taking the time to understand, okay, what's the knock-on effect going to be to how we work? Because effectively, for some businesses, in order to maintain social distancing measures, if you're having to have less people on your factory floor at any one time, you can only produce a certain amount. And understanding that is quite important, not purely to be able to communicate to the client, but also to understand for us internally. We're then saying, the third thing is we're then saying, okay, what does that mean for our cash flow? How do we, based on what we're now saying our production timeline looks like, what does that mean for cash flow? How do we use that to best manage our supply chain? And then the fourth thing is, this is a period where a lot of businesses are having to remain flexible. So we're setting out some various scenarios, some various action plans, and then regularly on weekly increments, we're saying, okay, how did we do against this particular scenario? Is it working? Is it not? If it's not working, let's move to something else.
Okay, so you're working out strategies to now start taking people out of furlough and back into production. I think the interesting thing is, as you look at and you assess that process, is crunching the numbers. So running the cash flow is that, given what I can claim under furlough, so my 80% grant back from the government, if I'm taking those people out of furlough, what can they produce? What is my GP? My gross margin, gross profit I can get from that? Is it worthwhile doing? And within the constraints of safe working practices and all those things. That's interesting. So we're coming to the point now as people actually already deciding to take people off of furlough, which is quite
exactly. And the proactive planning you just talked around does in itself start to set out a timeline for you. Mm-hmm. Because communication with your own client, the understanding of what taking people off furlough means for the cash flow, all of that starts to set out a timeline.
That's great. Actually, it's always worth noting is that, as I've been talking with clients as well, is my challenge has always been is what is the before you decide to furlough, or even to encourage you to take people out of furlough, is what is the most creative entrepreneurial thing that I can do now to actually get my teams productive and doing things? Because we know that when individuals on furlough, they're now unproductive. They can do training, but for most businesses that means they're not revenue, they can't be revenue generating. So what interesting and creative entrepreneurial things can I do today to get my teams productive again? Right, so let's just plow on through. So we've got the mirror for the furlough scheme in the self-employment space. So we know that if you're self-employed, so you're not employed, you can't access the furlough scheme, so you have to access the self-employed income support scheme instead. Now, we don't know a lot of new information on this. The scheme has not launched yet. The government, and in particular HMRC, have been focused on building and launching the portal for the furlough scheme first. The message is still the scheme will open up in May. You'll receive a letter or some communication from HMRC if you're eligible, inviting you to apply. HMRC won't necessarily get all of that correct, so you should keep an eye on seeing if you receive that and making sure you speak to us or contacting HMRC if you don't. We spoke about last week that you had until the 23rd of April to submit your 1920 tax return in. Okay, so that date has now passed. If you haven't been able to submit your tax return for the last tax year, you are no longer eligible for this scheme. So it's only for those who had a tax return with HMRC in the 1920 tax year. It's also worth highlighting again, as we continue to get questions on this, is that earnings via dividends. So if you are a small business owner, so you own a limited company, perhaps you're a director shareholder, the dividends that you receive as a shareholder do not qualify as self-employment income, so you won't be claiming under this scheme. So just to reiterate on that again, so if you are a director, you probably have a small salary and a large dividend that comes out the other end. The dividend isn't eligible for any scheme, but the PAYE part is, though this is probably below £10,000 for a lot of directors out there. So as a director, you can furlough yourself. And the guidance says that, as a furlough director, you can continue to undertake your fiduciary or your legal duties to protect your limited company, pay your taxes, file your accounts, things like that. But you can't undertake any activities that are revenue generating. Okay, so if you're happy to furlough yourself within that context, you can make a claim under the CJRS scheme for 80% cap, £2,500 of the income that you receive under PAYE. Okay, so the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, or CBILS. So this is the scheme where the government are guaranteeing 80% of the debt that the bank provides to you. Now, the biggest issue of this scheme has been covered heavily in the media, as the banks have been very, very slow at processing, approving and dispersing these loans. The data that we had yesterday from the government said that 20,000 loans have now been approved and presumably are either dispersed or processed of being dispersed. But this number is still incredibly small, both within the context of the UK SME economy, and also comparing ourselves against countries like Germany, who I think have had almost 50-60% more loans approved than this. What is good to hear, though, is the rate of approvals is increasing. So we know that of this 20,000 loans that have been approved, 6,000 were approved last week. So that shows that some of the stops in this, or as the banks are learning how to process these loans, they're getting better at them, and the rate should be increasing. What also is helpful is the number of accredited lenders is increasing. So originally we had 40 lenders, and now each week we're seeing new lenders approved, including the likes of Co-op Bank, Sterling Bank, Funding Circle, quite importantly, getting up and running on the scheme as well. And we've just in the last few days had our communications from Funding Circle showing that they're opening up our advisor portal so that we can start making loan applications on your behalf via Funding Circle. And Funding Circle historically are reasonably quick and efficient at processing loan applications, so hopefully this will help things to get things moving. We also learnt over the last few days that peer-to-peer lenders are now also going to be introduced as accredited lenders, so the big ones out there, ThinCats, Assets Capital, etc. And these lenders also have a good track record of producing new products quickly and processing loans relatively quickly. So that should also help ease the flow of these loans out to SMEs. It goes out, I said this last week, and I said again now, that if you've already had a no from a bank or struggling to get through a bank, keep going back to them, because as banks are learning how to process these loans better, some of the no's are turning to yeses. Now, Ravi, have you got any comments particularly on how banks are processing loans at the moment? So I know you're out there doing quite a lot of work for our clients there.
Sure. So I think, like I said, some of the larger high street banks we're starting to see their response time increase, albeit not hugely. So what we've been doing quite quickly as part of creating the application for our current incumbent high street lender is also reaching out to the other challenger banks. So we're always having a mixture of, okay, our Lloyds or our Barclays or our NatWest, plus some of the more challenger banks who are partner lenders of the British Business Bank, to try and make sure that we're getting a number of offers in as quickly as possible. Because in some cases, some of the high street banks will ask, if you don't already have a relationship manager, they'll be asking for you to arrange a callback, and all of these things take time, because as soon as you apply for a callback, you're on a waiting list. Mm-hmm. So the key thing is because all the lenders tend to be asking for approximately the same amount of information, applying to multiple lenders at the same time is something we've been actively doing for each of our clients.
Great. So it's a really important point there, in that in your capital raising strategies, it's always good going out with a strategy rather than just making applications here or there. Is going out to multiple lenders it should be right at the top of the list of that strategy, because you can always say no to an offer. Sometimes it can frustrate banks to do that, but it's in your interest to run multiple applications and across different types of lenders. So Ravi was talking about the challenger banks versus the high street banks. I suspect that the high street banks will ultimately offer cheaper rates, but they could take 3 times as long as a Funding Circle to process your application and disperse the funds. And it's cash in the bank that you need now that's going to keep your business afloat. And remember that the government are actually, for the first 12 months, they're covering the interest payments anyway. So it's only beyond that we might see a rise. Okay.
We have even seen some circumstances where some of the newer appointed lenders onto the panel have said, okay, look, just send me our relationship with those particular lenders, where it may be like an asset finance house. I said, look, just send us the application form you've already applied with, and we'll use that information to put into our application form as soon as we're accepting them. So the challenger banks are actively out there seeking to provide some funding.
Great. It's also so just in line with that as well. What Ravi and team are doing is they're trying to match the right lenders to the right borrowers as well. So certain lenders that are looking for certain types of things, and also helping you as a borrower understand what sort of debt should I be trying to raise. You know, is it overdraft? Is it asset finance? Is it a term loan, etc. Okay, so the big announcement, the big new thing related to the CBIL scheme, and hopefully easing a lot of pressure in the system, is the aptly named Bounce Back Loan Scheme, as Rishi announced on the media channels yesterday. Now, we don't know a lot about this apart from maybe the name and really what's going on in it, so we'll continue to report as we do learn new things. So what is the scheme broadly? So this scheme has been designed specifically focused at the micro small business end of the scale. So it will be for loans under £50,000. And the scheme will provide, well, the scheme allows the government to provide a 100% guarantee against the debt. So this is in light of what Rishi said last week, where he didn't believe or was yet to be convinced that a full 100% guaranteed scheme will be helpful and value for money for the UK taxpayer. Now, clearly, the data that's we've seen over the last week and the rate of the loans coming off of the high street banks under the CBIL scheme has been too slow, and this is clearly then now a good use of money, a use of government money to release tension for smaller businesses. So smaller businesses will be able to apply for a loan that will be sized as 25% of your annual turnover and capped at £50,000. Much like the CBIL scheme, the government are going to pay the interest in the first 12 months. And as a side note, from what we can find out and see on the media streams and our contacts, is that the government is working with the lenders to ensure that the interest is low and bearable and sized appropriately for the remaining of the term loan, but we don't know a great deal about that yet. We know there's going to be no forward eligibility checks, so we don't think it's going to be sort of checks of whether you need the loan or not. We're not sure. It will be a simple application process, perhaps 2 pages, and will be self-certified. And the government said that these loans will be dispersed within 24 hours of approval. Now, I suspect that there's a longer processing time, and there'll be big queues, and there'll be time you'll need to prep to gather some information for the loan. So we would expect probably to have a loan process of perhaps 10 days. We hope to be proved wrong, but that's what I'd say, perhaps 2 working weeks, perhaps to get your application together, get it in, get it looked at by a bank, and then processed and dispersed. The scheme is being opened very quickly, so from 9 AM Monday, the scheme will be open. Now, what are the important things that we still need to know? Now, clearly, we don't know who's going to be providing these loans. Presumably, it will be either all of or a small subsection within the current accredited lenders. I suspect that the high street banks will be involved in this, and perhaps the smaller fund type lenders won't be. And we don't know yet what the eligibility criteria for perhaps like the size of business will be. Is it going to be limited to businesses with below a certain turnover, for example? So as soon as we know that information, I'm sure you'll see it on the news every evening, but we'll try and update you, and we'll figure out how we can help you make these loans or access these loans rather. Now, also hiding in the shadows a little bit is this scheme around the Futures Fund, looking at businesses or trying to help businesses which are more equity funded startup style businesses, and this Innovate UK grant scheme focused on providing funds to businesses that are heavily involved in R&D. There's still not a great deal of information around these, but what we do know is the Futures Finance Fund is going to be targeted at those that have raised equity in the last 5 years. So I believe it's you must have raised at least 250 grand in equity. So that's probably businesses that are of a tech nature or their startup style business. And what the Futures Finance Fund will do will be to make structured debt investments into these. So between, we've got 125 to capped at 5 million, they'll be using a loan note type instrument that will convert into equity in certain distressed circumstances. But we don't know what the application process will be. We don't know any further eligibility requirements for this. And as we find out, we'll make sure that we circulate that information. But if you do think you qualify this, it's worth talking to your usual partner contact or CM to let them know that you may want to get access to it, so we can make sure we can update you as soon as we know how you can make those applications. And then in line with this as well, we have this R&D cash grant. Now, just to be clear, this is not an R&D tax credit, so that's a different system, and that system is still running and still a really good way for you to access cash as well at the moment, is applying for an R&D tax credit. So this is something separate, where the government has put together a whole lot of money and set it aside, and is going to be using that to make grants to support businesses that are classified as R&D intensive businesses, or at least are undertaking R&D intensive activities. We haven't yet got the full definition of what that is, but as we learn more, we'll make sure that we update those in the portfolio. We already do work with a lot of you to make R&D tax credits, so we'll make sure that we're specifically looking at all of those cases to see if we can also access this. We do know that payments from under the scheme will be made during May, so we hope to learn more over the next week or so. All right, so that brings us to the end of our major update.